game mechanics that don't suck. I find that very interesting because we are currently working on game mechanics. What we did just now, the possibility to have trees obscure vision, and possibly, you know, when I place my unit here, I can't see this entire part. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know yet, but maybe it is. I feel like it is, because it allows me to create maps that are more interesting than just have a plain map and enemies running there. Now I have to worry about, shit, can my unit actually attack this guy? Maybe not. So maybe I don't place him here. Maybe I place him somewhere else. Let's go, guys. Let's see. What do you have to say, sir? Are you loading? You loading, sir? Are you good? Is that YouTube ads? Intrusive ads?
Last year I set out to make an ultra-fast, melee-focused game all about using momentum to skillfully parkour your way around.
And we played that!
And brutally slash
There's
your
more
way through
content.
enemies. There was only one problem. The core mechanic of the entire game, this air dash, was just utterly terrible. It was actually so...
Yeah, I mean, I never managed to do it myself. We played the game yesterday, or I think 2 days ago. And I think I must have missed a tutorial on how to do the dash in the air. It's still possible to miss it. Now, obviously, I didn't pay the utmost attention to all of the pop-ups on screen, the little text that happens. However, I think what he needs to add, even now, is some sort of way to force you to use the dash, or like some sort of emergent gameplay mechanic that forces you to use the dash in a way that it's obvious to the player that you can use the dash. Because I never found out I could actually dash in midair.
bad that playtesters just straight up wanted it removed from the game entirely. So yeah, this wasn't good. I had high hopes for this mechanic. In fact, my plan was for it to be like the centerpiece of the whole game. The hat in Super Mario Odyssey, or the portals in Portal. So what the hell, man? Why was this mechanic so unfun? Well, I've spent the last year or so trying to answer that question. And in this process, I learned something. Great mechanics aren't made by coming...
Do I need to rewind this, or can you guys remember the last words he said? He spent the last year, that is like 365, 67 days, making this mechanic more fun. It takes some time. And now he shows an image of a game developer who has made a game in C++ called Animal Well. And you know how long it took him to do that? 7 years. I'm just pointing that out because I'm 2 years, 3 years soon in. Couple of months, then I'm at 3 years. I'm just saying.
Out with some great genius idea.
Saying.
More likely than not, they're evolved from shittier versions of themselves. So that's what I'm talking about in this devlog.
Oh wow, I missed a lot of the tutorial.
From something that didn't really feel right in my game at all to something that now is the centerpiece of everything. All right, let's go.
The sound effect is awesome.
Once said, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So now I'm left wondering how I can perspire this mechanic into something actually good. And in case you haven't caught wind of this yet, I've never shipped a game before. And when push comes to shove, I don't know what I'm doing. So like any good gamer, I gathered resources. I stole
gathered resources. Huh. Interesting. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
tons of ideas from this book, Game Feel by Steve Swink, which mentions 7 important concepts for making a game mechanic feel great. And after reading this book, I basically gave Blood Thief's air dash mechanic an F in 4 of these categories. I want to start...
Predictable results. Instantaneous response. Easy but deep. Ooh. Novelty. Novelty is basically something new, right? So something that is not really done before or has not been done before in any other game to that degree. And it's basically, yeah, something new, something unique to your game. Unique, okay. Organic motion harmony. The motion organic for the dash at the moment, or so what I see right now, it feels really good. And harmony, I don't know exactly what he means by that. But maybe he goes into this further.
Start off by talking about this one, appealing response, because I think this is what most people think about, myself included, when we think about game feel. So I think it's a good place to start. Appealing response is just an academic way of saying juice. Gamedev Toolkit has a great video on it, and I actually talk about juice in some of my other videos.
Oh, like, you know, feedback, like the screen shake, the explosions, the sound effects, the flashiness, the nice little pixel art range indicator that adapts to the size of the range.
I like to think of it as what gives your mechanic that initial zing that
Oh,
makes
yeah.
it satisfying to use. It's what makes people go,
Ooh, there's a dash mechanic too. I like the dash.
Ooh, that was neat. I want to do it again.
so how can we add juice to this mechanic?
Yeah, it
well,
needs
we
to
can
feel
see my
good.
first attempt at juice with these speed lines here that pop up when you start air dashing. It's not bad, but there's so much more that we can do. In the first iteration of this mechanic, enemies just fly away from you when you kill them, which is definitely fine. A little zany, I guess, but it's the exact same thing that happens when you attack an enemy normally. In order to make this attack feel extra unique, well,
Destroy
something
them.
unique should happen. I made it so the enemies get full-on jibbed when you air
Yeah.
dash them. I already talked about this in a
Boom.
past video, but I've made it like a bazillion times better since then, so we're talking about it again. Now,
That's funny.
This effect is actually 5 different effects working in tandem. The first effect is a blood decal spawner, which spawns these blood decals all around the enemy.
You see how much shit goes into games? You never notice this, right? So he's doing 5 effects. You know, just take that into perspective. Other than just, you know, a little particle here and there, he's adding so many things. You can also see particles and then chunks flying away, which are meshes probably, or maybe
These
particles
depth
too.
position.
But I think these are
decals
meshes.
took me like 5 seconds to make. It's literally just spray paint tool in Sprite, and I made a few different variations
Sprite, best pixel art program.
of it. I
True.
made it smart enough to understand when you killed someone close to a wall, so the blood will get splattered on the wall too, which I think is
Nice.
a sick effect. Second
Yeah.
effect is just this thing that spawns all these jibs at the enemy's position when it explodes. Again, this jib piece is very simple.
Yeah, it's a mesh.
just a Blender default icosphere that I mangled a bit. The third effect is just this blood spray particle effect that is just a bunch of little red quad billboards.
Nice green
It has
screen
this
off.
nice
Oh, sorry.
pixel art look, which I love. So I actually reuse this
Thank you.
effect with all sorts of particle effects in the game. And the fourth effect is this additional blood decal system that I made specifically for the player's soul.
I think that's a particle system using gravity as well. It flies through the floor, so there's no collision detection on these particles. It's just flying off in random directions. Yeah. So you see how much goes into just one effect if you want to make it really juicy. But this type of stuff makes the game feel much, much better. And you know, so when people spend a lot of time on this one thing, there's a reason for it.
Sword and arm. When you
And so, like, to give you an example of how it's done badly, when we're talking about my game, the feedback of hitting an enemy is weak. I'll make it a bit louder for you guys. It's a bit loud. Listen to what happens. The number could be cooler. The number could pop up like boing, right? That is much better. That's already a very nice feedback. The sound effect is atrociously bad. It's just a and I don't have blinking so as to not confuse the player. But I know that this impact is terrible. It's really bad. And it gets even worse. This one right here. This is an ability that spawns a bunch of orbs around the player. When he spawns these shields, as you can see, it impacts on an enemy, but there's not much what's happening. You know, this shield, it looks kind of nice, has a glowy effect to it. That's also a couple of effects. It has a shadow happening below itself. But the feedback itself of the shield hitting the enemies, it doesn't feel juicy. I mean, it doesn't feel good. The impact, you don't feel it very well. Okay? Now, it's a tower defense game. That's a little different. Also, why a shield? Because this guy is all about shields. You can give him some armor pieces. For example, yeah, I can give him a shield here. So this guy is all about, you know, having defenders, and these shields are like spikes. Could be something else too, you know. It's inspired by Vampire Survivors, so I have a really easy time here to take a look at how Vampire Survivors does it. But Vampire Survivors can work with knockback. I can't really do that in my game, because the enemies are not approaching me from all sides. They are walking along a lane. And while I can knock them back along the lane, it feels a little bit odd with this shield mechanic, this mechanic here. So yeah, so basically what he's talking about is that part. Making this part more juicy is actually really difficult. So he spent an entire year on this, and I can see why. Because it's not obvious to you what exactly you need to do in order to make that better. You know, maybe I can add some particle effects whenever a shield hits an enemy, and these particles effect are very bright.
You do something that would logically make you super bloody, like exploding an enemy at point blank, your character will just get doused in blood. And last but not least is this blood streamer effect, which is heavily inspired by Ultra Kill's blood. I just think it looks awesome.
Yeah,
and
that looks
just with
cool.
those blood effects, we have turned the attack from this to this. All right, I have to admit,
Much better.
I might have gone too far with all this blood. I mean, like, this is insanely gory now. So, yeah, let me know in the comments if you agree.
No,
I
I
definitely
think it's
I'm gonna
fine.
need some, like, gore amount settings
Nah, yeah,
or something
maybe, but-
eventually, but problem for another day. Anyway, at this point, we have something pretty sweet, but it's missing potentially the most critical ingredient. Sound. I see so many devlogs completely
Yep.
ignore sound. And
Yeah, sound is so
honestly,
important.
I kind of get it. Making great sounds is freaking hard.
Like a little tip, if you want to make sounds, you can download a program called DaVinci Resolve. That is also free. It doesn't cost anything. You can just use it, even commercially. And then you just take a video. I have a couple of sound effects that I made here. For example, this one, the explosion of the ice trap. And so what you do is you take a video of the animation that you're interested in, that you want to do a sound effect for, and then you just layer the sounds below, and you get, in DaVinci Resolve, you get some options, not all of the options, unfortunately, that Audacity gives you. However, enough options to mix and match these different sounds together to make it as good as you can. And I'm by no means a pro when it comes to this, but I managed to do some really nice effects. Oh yeah, this is the first effect that I made here. Yeah, that one you heard, right? And then the last one was the gold one. Really cool stuff that you could do. And I think it makes it a lot easier than working with purely Audacity for sounds, because you get the visual effect at the same time. Reaper gives you far more options for editing audio and lets you sync to video too. Oh, that's really good to know. So I'm gonna try out Reaper in the future then. That's actually a really good tip, because Reaper is free as well.
It's actually the only thing in Blood Thief besides music that I've invested real money into, and I actually contracted a professional to.
Yeah, really good sound effects can go a long way. I agree with him. If you're failing to do good sound effects, which I can only speak for myself, I do, hiring a professional, and also for the music maybe, could be something you go into. Because not everyone is the developer of Stardew Valley who has an affinity for music and was already very deep into music before making a game. That is something
Roman Perry, who
that is very important.
I'll link in the description,
If anything, it's more important than visuals.
did all the sounds for Blood Thief, and it was 100% worth every penny. Let's look at the before
Cool.
and after.
Yeah. Damn.
Now for the finishing touch, which is basically just a juice cheat code. Slap on a little screen shake. Man, I don't know what it is about screen shake, but it really just makes the mechanic feel so much more impactful. Take it
Oh
away,
yeah, it's
and
a it's a small little shake.
Now stand aside.
All right, so that's juice. And that brings me to my next part. There's
Okay.
this weird phenomenon that happens when you make a game. You get used to all the bugs and janky parts of your mechanic. Your subconscious learns every little pitfall that exists and learns to silently avoid them without even realizing it. So when you play your
Okay.
game, it feels great. But then you show it to players and you realize that you
True, that's true. So the one thing that I totally forgot that you could do in my game is just place a bunch of units. You could just place millions of them. You know, and I was earning so much money that I didn't realize, oh shit, I can place all of these units. I was just focusing on placing 2 and then upgrading this one guy. It sounds simple, but you forget this when you're in the zone and you just make your game. True.
are in fact blind. Players hit every pitfall imaginable. They break
yeah.
your mechanic in ways you thought for sure were impossible, and the things you thought were so obvious they couldn't possibly be missed actually get missed by
Ignoring the
almost
very
everyone. In
important
other words,
tutorial
you
text. That's what I did. That's what I did. Ignoring the very important tutorial
obvious.
text. Aim at enemies in the air while to charge your air dash. Once charged, press right click to dash. Yeah, I never use dash. I miss that.
They couldn't possibly be missed actually get missed by almost everyone. In other words, you realize your mechanic is actually jank as hell. If we look back at GameFeel's breakdown of the 7 things you need to do to make
Easy
a
but
mechanic
deep.
feel great, I think the feeling of jankiness can be attributed to violations of these 2 concepts.
Predictable results,
and
instantaneous
instantaneous response.
Okay.
And you guessed it, this mechanic does a terrible job with both of these.
Okay.
Let's start with predictable results. So earlier I showed off a pretty simple example. You aim at a guy and you attack. At this point, the implementation for my mechanic was super basic. We give all our enemies a big sphere collider so they're easy to target from a distance. And we cast a ray out from the center of our camera, and if it hits one of these enemies' big sphere colliders, we can right click and air dash right at them. But this solution immediately starts to be problematic as soon as we add a second enemy. Take a look at this scenario. In this case, I'm wanting to air dash to this guy, but my ray cast is technically colliding
It hits this guy or this guy.
with the guy in front.
Collision detection in this kind of way is really annoying to deal with.
Remember, I've given these guys these extremely generous air dash colliders that are super big. And as a result, I'm expecting to air dash at this guy, but I actually dash at this guy, yielding a
The issue is if you make the collider too small, then you can miss too easily. And then it could potentially get frustrating. So maybe 2 colliders is the solution. Yeah, 1 big collider and then finer colliders. If you can't find the fine collider, you start using the big colliders. Yeah, it's like a double check. True. That's a good idea.
us an unpredicted result. This issue came up time and again in playtesting, and so,
I solved this on a game by having 2 colliders. The smaller one has a higher priority. Yeah, that's actually... maybe he does this too.
really need to be solved. So how did I solve this? Basically, instead of only caring about the first collider that my ray collides with,
doing that
I get
too.
a list of all the colliders that my ray collides with. What I really care about at this point is what knight I am most aiming at. We can figure this out by
that's
getting
also
this
smart.
vector, this vector, and this vector representing where I'm aiming. If I normalize these vectors, we can determine how close they are to our aim direction by taking their dot product with our aim direction. The highest dot product wins. So in this case, even though we're closer to this guy, we're actually going to dash to this guy now because we are able to calculate which guy we're most aimed at. Okay, so we've partially fixed this, but this still doesn't fully prevent unpredicted results. There's still one important issue here. With the current version of the air dash, the player doesn't know where the air dash is going to take them before they do it, which is kind of a big deal because
that's how he fixes that. Sorry, that's how he fixes this with the
halfway across the map in one click. But from another perspective, what if some players do assume that you would air dash at this closer guy? I mean, there's definitely some borderline scenarios like this one here, where these guys are super close together. In this case, where are we dashing to? How do we know? I improved this by making it so the air dash crosshair hovers over the knight that you're about to dash to. This way, no matter the scenario, you at least know where you're going to go.
That's good.
And with those changes, I think the air dash finally passes this test.
Can you make this even better? By somehow making the enemy brighter? Like what I'm talking about is Gothic 1 did that. You see this? You see the difference? Oh, like my head is in the way. This guy is currently being focused instead of this guy. And maybe you could do the same thing in the game instead of having like arrows pointing at it. Because like I'm purely talking about immersion. Like I would do that in my game if I wanted to go for maximum immersion. It could be better, but the errors are even worse. Well, it's a first iteration, but yeah, there's multiple ways to do this. Okay, cool. Maybe it's a B instead of an A.
Always yielding predictable results. And now for this second point, instantaneous response, which air dash violates all over the place. For one, air dash has a maximum range that is largely invisible to the player. If you try to dash a guy that is too far away, literally nothing happens.
True.
There's no indicator in the UI, no sound effect, and as a player, you're basically just left wondering why the air dash randomly isn't working. I improved this by making it so if you're out of range, the air dash cursor still shows up on the enemy. It'll just be dimmed. As you get closer, it gets less and less dim until finally you're in range and the charge animation starts to
with
play.
an animation.
Air dash also requires blood, and before, if you didn't have any blood and you tried to air dash again, nothing would really happen. I made it so if you're aiming at an enemy while in the air and you don't have enough blood, this dim little shield will pop up.
Yeah, I mean, now you're working a lot with UI in the game, which can take you out of the game, but how else would you do it? Maybe just a sound effect. Like, you know the annoying World of Warcraft sound effects? I'm out of mana. The target is out of range. I don't have a target. You know those? That you always turn off because they're so annoying? Maybe just a sound effect that is like... Like you're an empty gas tank. Like, you know how you're trying to start a car and it's like, you know, something like that. Need to spawn more overlords. Oh, yeah. I don't see a problem with the UI if it's good, but the shield maybe not. Yeah, the shield is a bit difficult to understand, right? What does shield mean? Is he protected against the dash? If anything, it should be like an empty vial.
And if you try to
Something
air dash
like
them,
that.
your blood bar will flash, the shield flashes, and your player coughs a very concerning and unhealthy sound. So now if the player intends
cough is not
to
bad.
air dash, no matter what the
Cough is a good
scenario is
idea.
in, whatever state the player is in, wherever you are in the world, something is gonna happen. Maybe it won't be the air dash.
But I think
per
we are a
se,
bit
but
nitpicky.
something's
It's
gonna
already
happen, and it's gonna
improving it a
happen in
lot.
predictable way. But there are still issues. Take this
Okay.
problematic example in the game. What if there are like 5 enemies all in a group? Look what happens now.
Eh?
From a
No,
computer perspective, what's happening is actually really simple. Our algorithm that I described a second ago
What the
is
fuck?
detecting little micro differences, but something's going to happen, and it's going to happen in a predictable way. But there are still issues. Take this problematic example in the game. What if there are like 5 enemies all in a group? Look what happens now.
Again in slow motion. Note the charge time keeps resetting. Shouldn't it be one click and you charge immediately? Why is it resetting? You need to aim for a bit, but shouldn't the charge be instant? Like if you're talking about an ability in a game, that's a charge, and you're tapping the charge button. Boom. Shouldn't it charge in that moment? It isn't. Yeah, but I'm not talking about if it isn't. I'm talking about if it should. If I press charge, it's like in League of Legends. If I put my mouse cursor somewhere and I press the D key, I flash. And you know, flash on F is wrong. So we have flash on D. So the moment I press flash, I don't charge. I just flash. Like, why would I have to charge? The charge, you need to aim on the same person for a little. Yeah, but why? To me, that sounds like some waste of time. It's a game mechanic issue, yeah. So when I press once, it charges, it should save that target that I'm going to charge to. And anything in the way maybe gets obliterated or gets stopped after a certain pierces, let's say, right? You are becoming a projectile at that point, and maybe you have a pierce count of 5. So you hit 5 enemies along the way. You know? Which is actually kind of funny way of thinking about it. It's odd, okay. Would
From
be
a
too
computer
easy. Would charge at every enemy instantly, but you have a blood. You can't always charge. If it's too easy, then you have to make the cost higher.
Perspective, what's happening is actually really simple. Our algorithm that I described a second ago is detecting little micro differences in what...
For a fast game, yeah, that's a good point, could agree. For a fast game like this, suddenly you need to wait for something. That's a, how you call it, when you lose your enthusiasm. Yeah, it's like it breaks the pace in a way, does it? Maybe not.
I'm most aiming at, and it's resetting the charge time every single time I start aiming at one enemy more than another enemy. But as a player, it's impossible to detect these little micro differences, and because as a player we don't know this hidden algorithm that's going on, it just kind of looks super glitchy, and on top of being really annoying both visually and audibly, this can actually be really frustrating from a gameplay perspective.
It sounds annoying
As a
too.
player, I'm aiming
Okay.
relatively accurately. However,
You know what I love about his videos? He's so self-conscious. Have you guys heard him complain one time? I'm telling you guys, he's setting himself up for success.
because the game is switching between 2 enemies, the charge timer resets, and I'm not able
100%.
to stick on an enemy long enough for it to charge all the way. I don't know if there's like an industry term for this, but this leads me to something that in my own head I call player grace. Basically, if you stop aiming at an enemy, maybe because there's a wall, maybe you aimed off them for an instant, the game will actually give you 150 milliseconds of grace before it actually denies you from being able to air dash.
That's like trying to dodge in Elden Ring, but you have to hold the dodge button. I don't understand. Like maybe if it's instant, it's bad, but I would make it instant.
You recharge from the beginning again. This allows you to aim off for an instant, but if you bring your cursor back over the enemy before the grace period, you're good. Everything will proceed as normal. I apply a similar concept in this scenario. If a whole bunch of enemy colliders are overlapping and you smoothly transition from one enemy collider to another with no air in between them, your dash won't have to recharge for the new target. This means that if you charge up your air dash all the way,
Why is it not
but at
instant?
the last second your target changes, it's not going to have to recharge. You'll just dash to the new
Fully
target.
instant would be too easy.
Not only do these grace mechanics prevent this weird glitchy scenario that I showed before, but it just makes the game feel much more natural and less frustrating to play. These kinds of
I mean, he
race
solved it, I
mechanics
guess.
are
He solved it, but I still don't understand the charge. It does add skill and anticipation. Okay.
absolutely critical.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong here.
For making the game feel like it's always producing predictable results. By the way, you can find this kind of stuff all over the place in basically every game. For example, I've also went ahead and added things like coyote time to jumping, where the player is allowed to jump.
There we go. There we go. There's coyote time again. Told you. It's a good mechanic. You should add it. If you have a platforming game, add that. And all the other ones that Celeste adds. Well, well, well. Oh, yeah. It's a good mechanic.
Jump off a ledge, even if they've technically already run off the ledge and are technically in the air. Or things like input buffering, where you can press a button just slightly too early and the game has a grace period built in, so it saves the input and plays it when the input technically becomes eligible.
That is very important too. Pixel perfect button presses suck ass. They just make it annoying and tedious.
To a mechanic with great game feel. The player gets predictable results and always gets an instantaneous, appealing response when they take some action. But
you know what's interesting? You see how he doesn't add more content? It's still the same map. That's essentially how you want to make your game. If you add a bunch of content and you don't have all of these mechanics in your game, you're going to have to revisit every single piece of content, every single platforming mechanic that you ever did. And guess what? You have to redesign them. You will never finish your game because you have to work overtime just on fixing all of the levels you designed earlier. So it's much easier to just have a test level built in that test level, then figure out the balance after you have more or less optimized your systems and you know for a fact that you're not going to change it much. And you can only do that once you have gathered enough feedback from players. It's really important. You're wasting your time otherwise. Adding content too early, while great, can also lead to an impossible task of fixing all of that content. Once you notice that a mechanic you had thought you wanted is absolutely bad and you should not do it that way.
The most important part still. How do I make the air dash fun and satisfying to play with in the long term as the player's skills increase? And this brings me to the part that I feel is the most important element of game feel. Making the mechanic easy but deep. Take a look at this chart. If you don't know by now from watching this channel, I think about this chart a lot. Essentially, it just really concisely shows what every game is tasked with. Steadily increasing the challenge as the player's skill increases. Don't increase the challenge enough and your game will start to feel boring. Increase it too much and your game will start to feel frustrating. I generally think of this chart when I'm thinking about the overall difficulty of my game. But I also think it's a really helpful visualization for teasing out the complexity of a deep mechanic over time. When a player first starts a game, they're learning everything for the first time. And it's generally a pretty overwhelming experience.
Yeah, so
the
you have to stagger that.
Really simple at first. Force the player to learn a super deep mechanic right away and the mechanic is just going to feel super janky and frustrating. Imagine if the first time you opened up Rocket League.
I think you can split up the deep mechanic into smaller mechanics to make it easier.
It made you do one of those crazy freestyle obstacle courses. You being a new player, lacking any context about the game, you might be thinking, oh, a ring obstacle course. I've done a million of these before. This should be easy. But then you go to try it and yeah, if you've ever played Rocket League before, then you know that this is just an impossible task for a first-time player. In that case, Rocket League's mechanics wouldn't feel deep at all. They would just feel jank. The game feel would feel terrible. This game design challenge also applies for Blood Thief. And so far, it's been super hard for me to cope with this fact. Seeing what skilled playtesters have done, I know the air dash ability has some insane depth, especially when combined with other abilities. And I myself have become so good at using the air dash in all sorts of crazy ways, so when I play, I crave levels that force me to do intense challenges.
Yeah. So for the normal player, like for example, I, who never even learned the mechanic, the levels just feel impossible.
To get through the level and win. And I want so badly for the player to experience this feeling of being this sword-wielding maniac flying across the map at ridiculous speeds. But the difficult pill to swallow is that the player does have to walk before they can run.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Air dash, to slide, to wall run, to ground pound. They need to learn how to just do a simple air dash all by itself. And what I have to constantly remind myself is that what might be boring to me, a highly skilled and experienced player of my own game, still can be quite fun and novel for new players because, hey, they're like right at the beginning of this curve here. Things can be quite simple and still be within this fun zone. I'm also constantly having to remind myself just how hard—
I have that issue too in my tower defense game. I'm so worried that the game's too easy too early on. I'm trying to make it more difficult, but then I realize, oh shit, the first levels are too difficult to do. So for example, if I place this guy here and I spawn too many units, he actually can't beat the wave and the player loses the game. I, as an experienced player, I know exactly where to place him. He's supposed to go here.
it is to learn a new thing. Like, in real life, we don't just see a new concept and immediately know it forever. No, we need to see it over and over and over for that concept to be pushed down into long-term memory.
Forgetting
I do a
curve.
really dumb thing in the current version of the tutorial for Blood Thief, where I show the player how the air dash works, and you only get to perform it once. It's then like a 5-minute gap before the tutorial makes you use it again. I've seen so many—
Oh my god, that's the part where I quit because I didn't know what to do. I jumped on this wall and then jumped there and I always died. Same, yeah. So it's still, okay, he's still working on that. The challenge ability chart is genius. It explains why you are always having the most fun when you're doing simple enums entries. The challenge matches your... Shut the fuck up. That's still in the game, bro.
players not
How do you
know
fix
what
this?
to do at this part. What it should do instead is show you the air dash, and then like 3 seconds later you perform it like 10 more times to really engrave it into your brain how it works. Needless to say, I'm reworking the tutorial and using a much more spaced repetition approach to teaching the player new concepts, teasing things out gradually,
he's still working on it.
and
Okay.
ensuring that the player has had plenty of practice before introducing new ideas. This inevitably means that these early levels will feel kind of boring to me, but I have to trust in the process. One thing I'm doing to help myself cope is putting optional secrets in the level that highly skilled players can pursue, but newer players can skip.
Oh, you see
like
up
this
there.
high up tunnel I put in this level. It's been so awesome seeing all the strategies people are employing to get up here. I also created a medals system so novice players can still beat the level and progress through the game, but more skilled
Dung metal, come on. You're shitting on the player for being bad? Come on, bro. Why do you need to know this? 99% of your buyers will already have played balloons. No, you're wrong. You're expecting
that
something.
understand the mechanics.
That is so wrong, bro. Yeah, have you, oh my god, like, have you not seen the video I showed of the guy playing my game who didn't know that you drag and drop enemies or your heroes onto the map? He spent 5 minutes trying to figure out how to place a unit in the level. That was your wife?
that a deeper level still have challenge.
Okay. All right. See you in 20 minutes.
Just to pursue. This kind of stuff widens that fun channel in this chart, making it more likely for the mechanics to just feel good for everyone.
This guy.
So, is this mechanic done? Absolutely not. In fact, I'd say there's still quite a bit of work left to do here, as I have to figure out what the gameplay looks like for the rest of the curve here when the player gets more skilled. And oh baby, am I excited for this part. I've only just started working on this stuff, but I have tons of enemy ideas and environmental stuff planned.
That's where I'm at too, actually. I'm actually in the same process as he is. We're in the same... Yeah, it applies perfectly to me. I have so many cool ideas, like big bosses walking onto maps. You have to group a bunch of your heroes together because they're doing MMORPG area attacks where you have to stack together to alleviate the damage, or how do you call that? Split the damage across all of your units. If you place one alone, he gets obliterated by the attack and dies. Stuff like that, you know, MMORPG type mechanics in a tower defense game. That would be like I dream of this constantly. Oh, it's so
keep
cool.
The air dash interesting and challenging as the player really starts to master it. But that's content for later in the game, so you'll just have to wait and see for that. Regardless, I'm so happy with the current state of this mechanic, and I'm stoked for the journey that players are going to go on as they learn all the quirks and nuances. I truly believe that a great mechanic is not some purely innovative idea sparked as a stroke of genius. I think a great mechanic is like a sculpture, starting out as nothing more than a simple, run-of-the-mill, generic concept that gets sculpted down into something unique and awesome over time, chisel by chisel. For those of you that are new, I'm currently running a public playtest for Blood Thief. You can join the playtest by going to Steam and clicking this button. You'll be let in instantly, and it will be added to your Steam library just like any other game. I'm working on some new levels to add to the playtest, and they'll be releasing very soon. Definitely join the Discord if you want the most up-to-date information on that. That's where I post announcements and generally like to hang out and chat with folks.
There we go.
If you're looking forward to the full game release, don't forget to wishlist. All right, that's all for this devlog. Thanks for watching.
Like, wishlisting the game is actually a really cool idea. Not because maybe you want to buy it, but maybe if you're a game developer and you want to learn, well, okay, how did this guy's game perform after doing all of these devlogs and, you know, going so deep into changing his game multiple times, listening to the audience. I think it's a great learning experience where you can maybe try to predict yourself, okay, how much is this game going to earn? How many people are going to play it? What is the public reception going to be? And then taking a look at the actual results. So this is the video here, guys. Blood Thief is a cool name for a game. I think Cakez should do the same and call his game Balloons Thief. Shut the fuck up, man!